When the mind screams, it is never talking about the now. It is talking about accumulated fears, old wounds, hypotheses that may never happen. It's as if there were a desperate narrator inside you, inventing chaotic scenarios to justify your restlessness. And even though you know these thoughts are not entirely real, you feel them like invisible knives. They squeeze your chest, speed up your pulse, and make you believe something is about to collapse. But curiously, the chaos doesn't come from the outside. It sprouts from your own imagination, and you find yourself trapped in an inner labyrinth that no one but you can see. There is a moment, there always is, when you realize that this mental noise is not just tiring you out, it's stealing you from yourself. It occupies the space where clarity should exist. It invades your calmest minutes, your lightest days, your simplest thoughts. The mind that screams turns the trivial into complicated, the possible into distant, the light into heavy. And when you try to control the noise, it gets louder. When you try to run from it, it chases you. It's a silent battle that few admit they are living, but that almost everyone faces. The most striking thing is that in this inner scenario, the soul does not compete. It doesn't raise its voice. It doesn't try to win chaos with more chaos. The soul expresses itself in whispers, subtle, almost imperceptible, delicate. They are those little signals you feel but ignore, the shiver that asks you to pause, the breath that asks you to slow down, the intuition that asks for space. It speaks in the rhythm of calm, not of anxiety. It teaches through gentleness, not impact. But you only notice this when you realize that the mind screams because it is afraid, and the soul whispers because it knows. And it is precisely in this difference in volume that the conflict is born. The mind is immediate. It wants quick answers. It wants certainty. It wants control. The soul, however, works with another kind of wisdom. It isn't worried about what might happen tomorrow, but about who you become in the process. The mind fears the unknown, the soul embraces it. The mind looks at threats, the soul looks at possibilities. The mind invents monsters, the soul creates paths. When you live only in the mind, everything becomes urgent, but when you begin to listen to the soul, everything becomes direction. The problem is that no one taught you how to distinguish these two voices. You grew up believing that thinking more is the same as understanding better. But overthinking is just an elegant prison. True understanding comes from listening, not from effort. And before we continue down this deep path, subscribe to the channel now and comment, "I am listening." This is not just a CTA, it is a commitment to your own silence, to your own process. The mind screams many times because you are carrying too many stories. Stories that are not yours, expectations other people projected onto you, inherited fears, narratives you never questioned. Each mental noise is like a heavy suitcase forgotten at the end of an inner hallway. You've grown used to the weight, but haven't noticed that you can simply leave it there and move on lighter. It's just that the habit of carrying pain creates a strange dependence. You spend so much time with your worries that you almost believe they are part of who you are. But the soul doesn't cling to any of that. It wants movement, wants renewal, wants space to breathe. It calls you inward to the center, to where nothing imprisons you. Yet the mind with its noise tries to convince you that silence is dangerous. Silence to the mind means lack of control. But to the soul, silence is home. It is return. It is the only place where you can truly hear yourself without interference. That's why, when you finally offer this space to yourself, something inside you reorganizes. And that's where the magic is born. The moment you realize you don't need to fight your thoughts. You don't need to defeat them, eliminate them, or shame them. You just need to understand them as echoes of the past, not as prophecies of the future. The mind's noise is only a desperate plea for attention, but the soul shows you that attention does not mean submission. You can observe a thought without following it. You can welcome fear without kneeling before it. You can hear the scream without losing your calm. When you learn this, a silent transition begins. Your days gain more space, your steps gain more firmness, your decisions gain more truth. You stop reacting to everything and start responding only to what matters. And little by little, your inner world begins to change color. The red of anxiety becomes the blue of serenity. The noise becomes music. The confusion becomes clarity. And you, for the first time in a long time, feel that you are returning to your own body, your own axis, your own center. But this journey does not end here. This is only the first of many steps. And there is still a lot of noise to slow down, many whispers to listen to, many layers to reveal. Silence, when it finally becomes a habit, doesn't just calm you, it transforms you. And that is precisely why the next block goes even deeper into this inner crossing, where the noise reveals its true intentions and silence shows who you have always been. There is a silent war going on inside you, a battle as old as consciousness itself. On one side, the mind, restless, unsettling, always looking for problems to solve. On the other, the soul, calm, patient, observant, waiting for you to realize that peace is not in control, but in surrender. And this war is not violent. It is subtle. It happens in the details, in the sigh you ignore, in the discomfort you rationalize, in the intuition you smother. The mind fights for territory, while the soul fights for space. And you, in the midst of it, try to survive the noise. The mind is afraid of emptiness. That's why when you try to be silent, it panics. It rushes to fill your head with scenarios, lists, obligations, imaginary conversations, worries that aren't even yours. It behaves like someone who can't stand being alone and therefore talks non-stop. The soul, however, has no such hurry. It does not fear emptiness because it knows emptiness is the place where everything is reborn. It is in this inner space that you rebuild yourself, that you realize what is essential, that you return to your own truth. But to hear the soul, you need to go through an uncomfortable stage, the withdrawal of noise. And this is not easy, because silence shows you what you've avoided for years. It shows your shadows, your wounds, your unresolved fears. The mind screams because it fears this encounter. It fears that you will discover what is really happening inside you. The soul, however, leads you gently, like someone who holds your hand in the dark and says, "Come. I'll show you there is nothing here you cannot face." And when you finally begin to listen to this whisper, something extraordinary happens. Reality stops being so threatening. You notice that it is not the world that scares you. It is what your mind says about it. You realize that half of your conflicts are internal dialogues, not external facts. And you see that the mental noise always tries to convince you that you are late, wrong, lost. But the soul always whispers, you are exactly where you need to be. And that sentence changes everything. Before we continue this deeper journey, subscribe to the channel now and comment, "I keep listening." This is your anchor, your commitment, your reminder that silence is not abandonment. It is a return. The mind, when lost, creates ghosts. It takes a simple doubt and turns it into a storm. It takes a small discomfort and turns it into tragedy. It takes a tiny uncertainty and turns it into an internal collapse. Because what it truly fears is losing the feeling of control. But the soul doesn't need to control anything to trust. It operates on a completely different logic, the logic of lucid surrender. It doesn't ask you to give up on life. It asks you to stop fighting against yourself. And when you understand this, something inside you unchains itself. You begin to realize that many of your fears are not yours. They were inherited, taught, absorbed. They are like old belongings you carry out of habit, not necessity. The soul asks you to put them down one by one so you can see how heavily you were walking because of stories that don't even belong to you. And each weight you let go of releases a piece of your silence. At this point in the journey, silence is no longer so frightening. It begins to feel like a place of rest, not a threat. You realize that within it there is a strength that noise was never able to give you. Clarity. Silence shows you what really matters, what needs to stay, what needs to go, what needs to change. It gives back what the noise stole from you. Presence. And presence in itself is a form of deep healing, because it places you back inside yourself, where you should never have left. But silence is also demanding. It asks for courage. It asks for honesty. It asks for a willingness to see your life without filters, without excuses, without masks. And that is exactly why it transforms, because only truth transforms. The mind screams to hide that truth. The soul whispers to reveal it. And when you choose the whisper, you choose your own evolution, slow, deep, inevitable. And now that you are beginning to recognize this inner war, the next block will take you even further, into the territory where you discover that not all noise is yours, not all fear belongs to you, not all anxiety is truth. There are deeper layers waiting to be revealed, and they will change the way you deal with your own mind. You said, there are days when the external chaos seems to take on a life of its own. Cars honk, people talk loudly, unexpected problems explode out of nowhere, and everything seems to conspire to rip you away from your peace. But the truth is simple and harsh. The chaos that really hurts you is not outside, it's inside. That's what you notice when two people live the same situation. One gets lost, the other remains solid. The world is the same, but how each one deals with the impact, that is the real frontier between torment and serenity. Imagine two people walking down the same street. Both trip. One gets annoyed, rants, feeds the drama as if the universe were personally against them. The other also trips, but breathes, smiles softly, and keeps going. It wasn't the stumble that changed. It was the inner state. The external world is just the stage. The real experience is born from the inner spectator that you are. Those who live in the scream of the mind see threats. Those who live in the whisper of the soul see lessons. Deep down, you don't react to the world. You react to what the world awakens inside you. That's why the ancient Stoics insisted you only control yourself. It's not abstract philosophy. It's a practical manual for emotional survival. When you react automatically, you become a slave to circumstances. When you respond consciously, you become the author of your own life. The world remains chaotic, unpredictable, noisy, but you change the way you inhabit it. Turbulence exists, yes. What changes is whether you will be carried by the current or learn to swim within it. The soul is always trying to lead you to this place of lucid tranquility. When something happens, it asks for pause, presence, breath. It reminds you that the problem is rarely in the event itself, and almost always in the interpretation you create. But the mind, impulsive and noisy, turns any detail into urgency. It convinces you that everything is personal, that everything is serious, that everything demands your immediate reaction. And that's how you lose your own center without realizing it. Before we go on, subscribe to the channel now and comment. I remain present. This creates an inner milestone, a small ritual that reminds you to choose response instead of reaction, silence instead of noise. When you become able to observe your own reactivity, the magic begins. You realize that many of the conflicts you live are not real. They are accumulated emotional echoes, old memories that the mind projects onto the present. Neutral situations gain weight that doesn't belong to them. Small frustrations grow because they find fertile ground in your anxiety. And then you understand you are not fighting the world, but old versions of yourself that still haven't learned how to rest. The soul, on the other hand, does not carry these memories as absolute truths. It observes everything with a kind of silent wisdom. It knows that each event is just a wave. It knows that nothing is as big as it seems. It knows that everything passes, sooner or later. And when you begin to operate from this place, your life gains a new rhythm, a rhythm that does not react to chaos, but manages it calmly, as someone who has learned to dance in the midst of storms. It is at this point that you begin to regain strength. You discover that you don't need to react to everything, that you don't need to absorb everything, that you don't need to enter every battle. Each time you choose not to react, not to explode, not to lose yourself, you strengthen something invisible inside you. That something is your emotional maturity. This maturity creates space, creates healthy distance, creates clarity. And for the first time, you feel that you have choice, not just impulses. Over time, the world may remain tumultuous, but you do not. You become the quiet center inside the hurricane. You realize that many things that used to shake you now just pass through you like wind. And that feeling is liberating. You understand that peace is not the absence of noise. It's the ability to exist even when there is noise. It's not controlling what happens. It's controlling how you affect what happens inside you. And it is precisely as you approach this strength that a deep truth appears. Silence is not escape. Silence is power. And in the next block, we will delve deeper into this power, where you learn to choose your inner and outer battles and discover that some wars were never yours to fight. There's a common confusion that almost everyone carries, the idea that letting go means being cold, that stepping back from certain expectations means turning to stone, that learning not to react means losing sensitivity. But that has never been true. Detachment, real, mature, conscious detachment, is not the absence of feeling. It is the absence of emotional dependence. It is the ability to remain whole even when the world tries to fragment you. It is knowing how to be present without drowning. It is loving without abandoning yourself. It is participating without getting lost. You begin to understand this when you realize that most of your pain doesn't come from what happens, but from everything you insist on controlling. You try to control other people's opinions, other people's behavior, other people's paths. You try to control the future, control feelings, control outcomes, and that exhausts you. The soul, however, doesn't try to control any of that, because it knows that everything that doesn't depend on you is fragile ground. It focuses only on what is yours, your choices, your posture, your presence, and this completely changes your life, because when you let go of what you can't control, you reconnect with what really matters. The mind wants to hold everything tightly, as if the world were going to slip through its fingers. The soul knows that everything that is yours in essence remains, and everything that leaves was only fulfilling a stage of your story. This silent wisdom keeps you from clinging to people, situations, or old versions of yourself that are no longer part of your path. Detachment makes you see reality as it is, not as you would like it to be. When something no longer belongs in your life, detachment doesn't force, doesn't beg, doesn't plead, doesn't insist. It observes, it accepts, it understands. It is a way of living that turns pain into maturity and chaos into clarity. Deep down, letting go is not losing. It is creating space for what truly matches your essence. Only the mind fears this emptiness, and emptiness is precisely where the soul blossoms. Before we go deeper, subscribe to the channel now and comment, "I choose to let go." This is not just engagement, it is an inner commitment to your emotional freedom. When you finally understand what is not under your control, your energy changes. You stop attacking yourself with unrealistic expectations. You stop trying to save what does not want to be saved. You stop investing where there is no reciprocity. You stop insisting where life has already shown you it's time to move on. Your peace begins to increase precisely because you reduce the weight of battles that were never yours. It's as if you took off a heavy backpack you didn't even remember you were carrying. And then something extraordinary happens. You regain the power you used to spend on the impossible. It's as if all your strength comes back to you. You begin to direct energy toward what can be transformed, not toward what should already have been left behind. Detachment gives you back a kind of almost sacred focus, a focus that doesn't fight, doesn't scream, doesn't beg. It simply chooses calmly, chooses consciously, chooses truthfully. This process gives you an inner autonomy that no one can take away. Because someone guided by the soul does not live in the emotional oscillation of the world. You begin to move according to what is essential, not according to what is urgent. You act with clarity, speak with precision, choose with intention. Nothing drags you as easily, nothing knocks you down so quickly, nothing shapes you unless you allow it. This emotional independence is not hardness, it is freedom. And little by little, you realize what has always been in front of you. Silence does not distance you from anyone. It brings you closer to yourself. It clears away excess, dissolves anxiety, clarifies thought. And it is in silence that you find your true strength, the one that does not depend on circumstances, people, or results. The strength that is born when you finally stop trying to control what was never yours. This is the point at which you understand that detachment is not coldness. It is power. The power to remain whole in a world that tries to fragment you. The power to be light in a world that tries to weigh you down. And in the next block, we enter the deepest part of this journey, the art of letting go of what hurts without losing what matters, and the silent pain of carrying what should have been released long ago. There are pains you carry not because they still make sense, but because you got used to living with them. They are old guilt, broken expectations, unfulfilled promises, fears you have cultivated for years as if they were part of your identity. The curious thing is that these pains don't always scream. Many simply weigh. They weigh on your shoulders, weigh on your thoughts, weigh in the silence of the night. And when you try to move forward, you feel something pulling you back, not because it is strong, but because you still haven't let go. Letting go hurts, not because losing is bad, but because your ego wants to keep everything under control. It wants answers, wants explanations, wants neat endings and perfect conclusions. But life doesn't work like that. Sometimes you need to walk away without explanation. Sometimes you need to close cycles without goodbyes. Sometimes you need to accept that you're not going to understand everything, and that's okay. Maturity is born when you understand that peace is worth more than any elegant closure. The mind convinces you that letting go is failing, that admitting "I can't anymore" is a sign of weakness, that giving up something you tried to keep is like admitting defeat. But the soul knows the truth. Letting go is courage. Letting go is recognizing that certain battles were not meant for you. Letting go is understanding that life moves on, even when you remain stuck in memories that no longer resonate with your truth. Letting go is allowing yourself to continue, even if a part of you still wants to go back. And perhaps the hardest part is admitting that many times it wasn't life that trapped you. It was you who held on to what no longer existed. You clung to people who were no longer there, to versions of yourself that no longer served, to stories that only continued because you insisted on continuing to write them. The soul doesn't ask you to fight this. It simply whispers, "It's okay, you don't need to carry this." But the mind, stubborn, holds on even tighter. Before we go on, subscribe to the channel now and comment, "I choose to let go of what weighs me down." This anchors you. It commits you to your own inner freedom. When you finally let go, something unexpected happens. A space opens up. A space you didn't know existed because it was too occupied with the weight of what was no longer yours. And this space is precious. In it, lightness is born. In it, clarity is born. In it, the certainty is born that you no longer need to just survive. Now you can live. But as long as you don't let go, this space remains locked, suffocated, invisible. Letting go doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean erasing memories or invalidating feelings. It means honoring what was, learning from what remained, and moving on with what still makes sense. It means choosing yourself, not out of selfishness, but out of emotional responsibility, because staying where your soul doesn't grow is a silent form of self-abandonment, and no one deserves to live inside their own emotional prison built out of stubbornness. The pain of holding on to what should have been left behind is a slow, corrosive, almost imperceptible pain. It doesn't tear. It wears down. It doesn't explode. It consumes. It doesn't scream. It whispers that you are becoming increasingly distant from yourself. And the mind, trying to protect this attachment, creates justifications. Maybe it will change. Maybe it will get better. Maybe one day it will make sense. But that day never comes. Because what needs to be released does not evolve. It stagnates. When you finally accept this, you feel something like grief, but also like relief. A silence begins to emerge, as if the soul could finally breathe after years trapped under old memories. And in this silence, you realize that what hurt was not the loss, but the resistance. The suffering was not in the end, but in the attachment. The pain was not in what left, but in your attempt to keep something that no longer had life. And now that you are beginning to experience this freeing silence, the next block will take you even deeper to understand how to protect this inner space, how to prevent external noise from invading your peace, and how to turn your mind into a safe place where you can finally rest. The mind is like a room with the door wide open. Anything gets in: worries, other people's comments, expectations, memories, noise, old fears. You let strange thoughts cross the border without asking permission. And when you notice it, your inner space is so full that you no longer even know what belongs to you and what is just emotional invasion. Silence in these moments seems impossible, not because there is no peace, but because there are too many visitors. Over time, you realize that your mind has become a hallway where everything passes, except you. It has become a place that tires you instead of welcoming you, a place where you are a guest, not the owner. And this happens because you were never taught to protect your own door. No one ever taught you to say, your peace is also your responsibility. On the contrary, you were taught to please, to absorb, to carry, to endure, and so you made room for everything except for yourself. The soul, however, knows that a room without a door is not a sign of freedom. It is a sign of lack of boundaries. It whispers that you need to close some entrances, restrict access, filter presences, because your mind is a temple, not a storage room, a sacred place, not a transit point. But the mind, anxious and needy, convinces you that it needs to welcome everything so it doesn't lose anything. And in that process, you lose yourself. The truth is that peace is not something you find in the world. It is something you protect inside yourself. When the door is too open, any noise becomes a storm. Any criticism becomes a threat. Any change becomes catastrophe. And it's not because life is heavy, but because you left your mind vulnerable to everything that touches it. Silence cannot come in where disorder rules, and it is you who must decide when the tidying up begins. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel now and comment, "I close the door of my mind." This is your first conscious act of emotional protection. When you close that door for the first time, the world doesn't change, but your relationship with it changes completely. You begin to realize that you don't have to absorb everything you see, everything you hear, everything you feel. Some things can knock and bounce back, others can arrive and not stay. You begin to understand that you are not obligated to receive every thought as truth, nor every emotion as an order. This inner space finally begins to obey you. From this point on, you rediscover a power that has always been yours: emotional curation. The ability to choose what comes in, what stays, what goes out. It's like cleaning out a cluttered room after years, painful at first, but liberating in the end. You realize that many thoughts should never have spent the night inside you. that many worries didn't deserve to have occupied your silence, and that some voices should never have been heard so closely. And as this space begins to reorganize, a sense of inner welcoming is born, something you may not even remember having felt. The mind stops being an enemy and starts being an ally. It learns to ask permission before speeding up, learns to slow down before panicking, learns not to turn everything into urgency. It discovers a more human rhythm, less desperate, more conscious. It is in this tidy environment that silence can finally enter. It doesn't arrive making noise. It arrives like someone coming home. It settles, spreads, fills corners, calms walls, organizes thoughts. And when silence takes over the space, it shows you something you may never have noticed. Your mind always wanted to be your ally, but it was too overcrowded to do so. In the next block, we will deepen this ability to protect your peace, discovering how to build an emotional shield that protects you from chaos without distancing you from the world, and how to transform your routine into a territory where silence truly has permission to stay. There is an invisible force that protects you when you learn to recognize what belongs to your mind and what belongs to the world. The ancients called this inner armor. It is not coldness or indifference. It is lucidity. It is the ability to notice when something is trying to invade your peace and say in silence, "Not here." This shield is not made of hardness, but of presence. It is born when you understand that you don't have to absorb every impact, don't need to respond to every provocation, don't need to carry every emotion the world dumps on you. Life is full of noise, and it always will be. But when you cultivate a stable inner center, these noises stop cutting through you like blades. They hit, but they don't pierce. They touch, but they don't drag. You realize that many things that hurt you didn't have power of their own. They only had the power of your lack of inner boundaries. And when you regain this territory, you realize that peace is not as fragile as you thought. It is resilient. It is firm. It can be trained. One of the most powerful tools of this armor is journaling, putting on paper what the mind tries to solve in the dark. When you write, the thoughts stop running in circles. They organize, regulate, reveal themselves. Another shield is negative visualization, used by the Stoics, imagining the worst not to suffer, but to strip it of its power to frighten you. That way, when life happens, you are already emotionally prepared. And then comes the third shield, the present, the now, the only place where the mind finds peace and where the soul finds its voice. These practices transform your inner world because they teach the mind that not every sensation is a threat. An emotion is not a command. A thought is not a sentence. A doubt is not a tragedy. You learn to observe without identifying, to feel without sinking, to think without imprisoning yourself. Your presence becomes deeper, your breathing looser, your perception more open. The mind stops being a storm. It becomes a sky that accepts clouds but does not confuse itself with them. Before we go deeper, subscribe now to the channel and comment, "I choose my peace." This is your ritual to strengthen your own inner armor. As your emotional armor begins to take shape, you realize something powerful. Many situations that used to throw you off balance now pass through you like wind. A criticism becomes a point of reflection, not a wound. A conflict becomes a conversation, not an earthquake. An unforeseen event becomes adaptation, not collapse. Because you are no longer reacting from pain, you are responding from awareness. And that difference changes everything. You also learn to identify when the chaos you feel is not yours. Sometimes the anxiety is not yours. It belongs to someone close to you. Sometimes the fear is not yours, it is inherited. Sometimes the pressure is not yours. It is projection. Without an emotional shield, you absorb all this without realizing it. With it, you see it, understand it, but do not carry it. You become an attentive observer, not an empty container where the world dumps its frustrations. The practice of silence also strengthens this shield. Being quiet is not shutting down, it is listening to yourself. It is learning to distinguish between the voice of the mind and the voice of the soul. The mind speaks fast, loud, anxious. The soul speaks slowly, softly, truthfully. When you get used to listening to this whisper, you realize that the world does not need to give you answers all the time, because the answers were already inside you. You just had never given them space. And the more your shield strengthens, the more you discover that chaos is not an enemy. It is just a constant test of your presence, a repeated opportunity to practice what you have been learning. Because life will always push you, but now you don't fall as easily. You adjust, you breathe, you return to the center. You realize that your stability does not depend on external silence, but on the inner silence you have built. The next block will show you what happens when you stop chasing everything, when you abandon the need to prove, to achieve, to match, to please, and discover that true peace is not in seeking, it's in stopping running away from yourself. There is a moment in life when you realize you are running without really knowing where to. Running after others' approval, after goals that weren't even yours, after recognition that doesn't fulfill, after expectations that never end. It is a silent, exhausting, emotionally expensive race, and the more you run, the farther you get from yourself, because it is not achievement that wears you out. It is escape, escaping the emptiness, the silence, the question you avoid. Who would I be without everything I'm chasing? The soul never asked you for speed, it always asked for depth. But the mind, insecure, believes that being worth something means being in motion, producing, showing, impressing. And so you become hostage to an endless search where each victory lasts a moment and each achievement dissolves quickly. You begin to realize that you are not seeking a life, you are seeking relief. And that relief never comes because you look in the wrong place, outside yourself. When you finally pause, something strange happens. The mind panics. It says, if you stop, you disappear. If you slow down, you lose. If you don't compete, you fall behind. But the soul smiles, because it knows the truth you forgot. Stopping is not losing. Stopping is returning. Returning to the center, returning to the body, returning to awareness, returning to what truly matters. The soul knows that when you stop chasing, life stops running from you, and it is in this moment that you start to notice how the external pursuit kept you trapped. You lived trying to prove your worth to people who barely know you, trying to fill voids that don't fill with achievements, trying to show the world something that only you needed to believe. Silence reveals this without mercy. It shows you where you betrayed yourself, where you abandoned yourself, where you got confused. It is a mirror without filters, and that is why so many are afraid of it. Before we continue, subscribe now to the channel and comment. I stop running. This marks the beginning of your conscious surrender. Not surrender to the world, but surrender to yourself. When you finally stop, the inner world reorganizes. You realize you didn't need so much, that you didn't need to be so much, that you didn't need to prove so much. The anxiety you carried was not about the future. It was about the need to please. The goals you chased were not dreams. They were pressures. And when all that falls away, something simple, pure, almost forgotten remains. Your essence, that version of you that knows how to live without needing to be seen. The soul shows you that there is a kind of peace that can only be born when you stop constantly seeking. A peace that doesn't depend on achievements, applause, goals, numbers, validation. It is a peace that comes from within, that sustains itself, that doesn't need justification. A peace that allows you to sit with yourself without feeling discomfort, that allows you to breathe without haste, that allows you to exist without explanations. In this state, you realize that what you always sought was never out there. It was in the silence you avoided. It was in the pause you never allowed. It was in the rest you called laziness. It was in the lightness you didn't give yourself permission to feel. It is paradoxical. When you stop searching, you find. When you let go, you receive. When you slow down, you arrive. You then understand the great revelation. Life doesn't reward you when you run. It rewards you when you understand. Because running is surviving, but understanding is living. And the soul always wanted to teach you this, but you were too busy comparing yourself, pressuring yourself, losing yourself. Not anymore. Now silence has opened space for a kind of listening that did not exist before. And in that listening, you discover who you really are without all the movement. And it is precisely here that the next block will take you, to the encounter with your deepest strength, the one that makes you emotionally untouchable, that gives you back the stability you always sought in the world, but that has always been within you. Being emotionally untouchable does not mean not feeling. It means not collapsing in front of what you feel. It means that your strength does not depend on the world's mood, on other people's words, on life's changes. It's a stability that is born inside, not outside. A silent steadiness that holds you even on the days when everything seems to want to pull you down. You no longer fragment easily, no longer get lost in thoughts, no longer surrender to storms that used to carry you away mercilessly. Being emotionally untouchable is, above all, a daily construction. It is the result of small, silent decisions, breathing before reacting, observing before concluding, pausing before surrendering to impulse. It is cultivating a kind of maturity that doesn't show off, but is felt. A maturity that appears in the way you step back, in how you choose, in how you take a stand, and especially in the way you no longer allow life to drag you because you finally learn to walk beside it. You discover that you don't need to win every battle. You just need to choose which ones deserve your effort. The mind wants to fight everything and everyone. The soul chooses where it makes sense to place energy, and in that choice you become stronger. Your emotions stop depending on the world's chaos. Your heart stops depending on other people's stability. Your thoughts stop following every noise. From here on, you no longer live by reacting. You live by responding. You live consciously. You live present. And then a new realization appears. You always had strength. What was missing was not power, it was silence. What was lacking was not courage, it was clarity. What was missing was not worth, it was inner space. The mind's noise hid you from yourself, but now, with everything calmer, you can see yourself with honesty. You can recognize your own resilience, your own light, your own capacity to rebuild yourself as many times as necessary. Before we continue, subscribe now to the channel and comment, "I awaken my strength." This ritual seals your decision not to let the world dictate your peace. Emotionally untouchable is not the one who does not suffer. It is the one who does not get lost in suffering. It is the one who understands that pain is not destiny, it is a passage, that fear is not an enemy, it is a messenger, that doubt is not weakness, it is an invitation. You begin to use each emotion as a tool, not as a sentence. Instead of destroying yourself, you investigate yourself. Instead of running away, you welcome yourself. And thus you transform storms into self-knowledge, falls into lucidity, silences into healing. And the more you live in this state, the more you realize that life stops pushing you and starts teaching you. You no longer absorb everything that happens. You no longer shake with every opinion. You no longer lose yourself in comparisons. You keep your axis even when the world tries to throw you off balance. Your calm ceases to be circumstantial. It becomes identity. Your silence ceases to be escape. It becomes home. Your strength ceases to be defense. It becomes essence. This new presence creates a kind of inner field that protects you without hardening you. You don't become stone. You become root. You don't become steel. You become center. You don't become a wall. you become horizon. It is an expansive steadiness, not a rigid one, a soft strength, not an aggressive one, a stability that does not raise its voice but never falls. And the most impressive thing is how this transforms your relationships. You stop demanding that others give you what you stop lacking in yourself. And then, for the first time, you feel that life is no longer a battlefield, but a fertile ground where you grow with awareness. The mind, once desperate, finds rest. The soul, once smothered, finds space. You, once divided, become whole. The truth is simple. You did not become untouchable because you withdrew from the world, but because you finally came close to yourself. In the next block, you will step into the closing of this journey, where all your strength, your silence, your presence, and your lucidity meet, and you discover who you become when you stop running, stop fighting against yourself, and finally decide to live in peace with your own soul. There is a moment in the journey when everything begins to fall into place. You look back and realize it was not the world that changed. It was you. Your mind, once noisy and disorganized, now breathes. Your soul, once muffled, now leads. That old weight you carried without questioning has dissolved. That fear that seemed permanent has lost its strength. And silence, which once felt like a threat, is now home. This is the point at which you finally understand. Transformation was never about defeating chaos, but about not allowing it to defeat you. In this new state, you realize that life no longer needs to convince you of what matters. You feel it. You feel when something is true, when something is light, when something is yours. You feel when a situation pulls you away from your essence, and you feel when something brings you closer to yourself. The sensitivity that once confused you is now a compass. The silence that once scared you is now solid ground. The mind, which once dragged you, now walks beside you. The soul, which once was just a distant whisper, has become your clearest voice. This is where your inner and outer life begin to align. You stop seeking giant changes and begin to make small daily adjustments. And these adjustments change everything. You become someone who chooses with intention, speaks with presence, acts with awareness. You no longer live reacting to circumstances, but creating space within yourself to respond calmly. Emotional maturity ceases to be theory and becomes practice. And you discover that being at peace is not being immune to chaos, it is being bigger than it. You also realize that you no longer need to prove yourself. You don't need to justify your sensitivity, don't need to explain your calm, don't need to convince anyone about your path. When you find your own truth, the need for external validation simply disappears. The world's noise continues to exist, but it no longer occupies the same space inside you. Other people's opinions lose the power they once had, and what once would hurt you now just passes, because it no longer finds where to attach. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel now and comment, "I am silence within." This small gesture seals your decision to remain connected to your essence. Now you understand that silence is not absence. It is elevated presence. It is when you are so whole that you don't need to shout to exist. It is when you are so aligned with yourself that you don't need to explain your path. It is a silence that protects, that heals, that organizes. A silence that does not distance you from people, but brings you closer to your truth. You realize that everything you sought in the world, calm, clarity, safety, was always within you. It just needed to be accessed. And then a deep understanding reveals itself. The soul never wanted to save you from suffering. It wanted to teach you how to cross through it. It knew that by crossing, you would discover a strength that fear tried to hide for years. A strength that is born when you face your own noise and do not give up on yourself. A strength that does not show off, but can be felt in your gaze, in your posture, in your breathing. You become someone who carries peace, not because the world is light, but because you learn to be. This transformation changes your relationship with everything, With time, with love, with work, with people, with your own thoughts, life stops being war and becomes conversation. It stops being weight and becomes path. It stops being noise and becomes music. You begin to live with expanded awareness, seeing meaning where there used to be only fear, finding answers where there used to be only questions. Emotional maturity gives you life back, not the life the world sells, but the life the soul always knew. And at the end of this journey, you realize that silence did not make you untouchable through coldness, but through depth. You don't protect yourself from the world, you protect yourself within the world. You don't isolate yourself, you find yourself. You don't distance yourself, you rise. And when you look at yourself now, you see that you have become someone capable of listening to your own soul even when the mind tries to scream. You have become what you always sought, whole. And so you close this cycle, but not like someone finishing a chapter, like someone opening a new way of existing. Because the silence you found is not a destination, it is a path, and it will be with you in every decision, in every emotion, in every new beginning. All you have to do is listen. If something inside you has awakened, if some part of your mind has quieted, if some sentence has reached your soul, like this video now, that shows the algorithm that silence also deserves space. Share it with someone who has been carrying too much noise, someone who might only need to hear a whisper to return to themselves, and subscribe to the channel because there is still so much about your strength, your depth, and your inner peace that you haven't even begun to discover. The next step of your journey begins when you decide to stay.